Hello everyone, it's Simo again with another video about Google Tag Manager and stuff like that. This time we'll take an approach to iOS development. We'll build our own iOS application using Xcode. It's going to be a butt ugly application, but don't worry about that. The purpose of building that application is to learn how to use Firebase and how to send those events to Firebase Analytics so that we can collect them in a App Plus web property in Google Analytics for Firebase. So this is similar to the guide that I wrote for Android and the video I built for Android as well. But we're working with iOS this time, and it's fairly similar. There are certain idiosyncrasies that make iOS development a bit more pleasant compared to Android, but on the other hand, there are so many restrictions when working with Apple devices. But I won't go too deep into them. But the purpose of this video is to help you build your own test bed for iOS development, and so you can test and play around with Firebase and see where that gets you. So enjoy the video and see you soon. We're going to build this awful looking iOS app, which simply has the hello world text in the middle of the screen. It's similar to what we did with the Android in the Android setup. What this app does is it sends an event to your Firebase Analytics, so you'll be able to find your events in the stream view or the real-time view, as well as we'll learn how to use the debug view. And then we'll also add Google Tag Manager because we want to copy that Firebase Analytics hit and dispatch it to Universal Analytics endpoint. So with that all out of the way, let's get started and build our iOS app. You'll need two pieces of software on your Mac for this to work. I'm not sure if you can, how much or how well you can do iOS development on a PC. You'll probably need a virtual environment or something. So we're working on a Mac here. So you'll need two pieces of software. The first one is Xcode, which ships with your operating system, but you'll need to make sure that it's up to date. So you can find it in the applications menu of your Mac. And the other piece that you'll need is cocoapods, which is the dependency manager for iOS development. And cocoapods, if you have it already, you can run pod version and it will tell you if you've already have it installed. If you don't have it installed, you need to install it using a Ruby gem. So using the super user mode, you would write gem install cocoapods. And after inputting your password, because you're using the super user command, it will install the latest version of cocoapods on your machine. And after that, you can try pod version to make sure it works. So to create our app, we will go to Xcode, which I just shut down. So we'll go to Xcode and we'll create a new project to start with. It's going to be a single view app, so a very, very simple application chassis that we'll build, and you can expand on it later with once you've got the whole thing running. You'll need to give the product some kind of a name. So let's go with my test application. If you want to run the app on your own phone, so by adding hooking your phone with a USB cable to your computer, you need to create a team. So you can actually create a team with just your Apple ID. So follow the prompts in the team menu to link your Apple ID to your team. But this is required if you want to run the application on your phone. But we're going to use a simulator just to keep things simple, at least keep things simple for the video recording. You can add something, an organization identifier. I'm using Simo, so the bundle package name would be simo.mytestapplication. Keep the language as Swift. Swift is the language we'll be using, and it's the most modern language you can use for native iOS development. When ready, click Next and then find a folder where you want to add the project files to. So I have this iOS test folder already. So after clicking Create, it will create your application, and you can see all the project settings right here open. When you look at the left-hand side navigation, you can see your project files here. So we have the app delegate file, which basically contains the lifecycle callbacks and the lifecycle hooks of your application. You can add code that will run, for example, when the application enters background, when the application returns to the foreground, and so on. And we'll add some code here, which is the code that is run when the application is first launched. And then there's a single view controller which controls the first thing the user sees, which is at the moment is just a blank screen. So what you'll want to do, just to give this some some visual kick. It's absolutely ugly, but it's not going to get any better. But choose the object library in the top bar here, and then you can drag a text field onto the app. Let's just add some text here. Let's use the classic hello world text like this. Once you're done, choose a phone model from the list up here. If you have your device connected to your Mac, you'll see it in the device list up here, but we're going to use a simulator, so let's just choose a iPhone 6, for example. And then you can click the run button to have the application build and finally launch in the emulator window. So here you can see the emulator firing up with the iPhone 6 running iOS, and it should show up with your hideously ugly application once it completes firing. So here we go. There's the text. So now we have our application built, and now we just need to add Firebase to it. So let's just to save some resources, let's close the emulator. We don't need that for now. It will automatically stop running the application as well. So now go to console.firebase.google.com and log in with a Google ID that you have access to, and you have permissions to do stuff. So there's not an organization that restricts your ability to create new cloud projects, for example. Click create a project, and then you'll need to give your project a name. So let's call this my test application. Here you can find the project ID, so you can change that if you wish. It's a good idea to keep it as clear as possible. So let's do something like Simo iOS test application and then save it. Once done, click continue. Now is the important part where you link your application to Google Analytics. So your Google Analytics means Firebase Analytics. It's Google Analytics for Firebase is basically what we're working with here. So it's not Universal Analytics anymore. Once you configure and link your Google Analytics to your project, a new App Plus Web property will automatically be created in your Google Analytics account. So here you can choose. If you have a Google Analytics account, you would have been able to choose it just there. I don't have one, so I'll create one. Find my country here, uncheck some stuff which I don't want, accept the terms, and then it will create the project. And this spinner will go around as it creates the project. And there we go, our project is ready. So let's click continue. And now you can see that here's your Firebase project. This is the Firebase console. You have the analytics stuff over here on the left hand side, but you'll also find in your Google Analytics account under the Google Analytics user ID, you'll find your new application as a new property. So the same set of reports can now be found in the Google Analytics user interface with a bit different layout. So real time is the same thing as stream view here, for example. So we'll be using this environment to debug our application. There's not going to be anything here yet because we're not sending any data. So then you'll need to add a new application to this Firebase project. So let's create an iOS application. And the first thing it asks for is the bundle ID. And to find the bundle ID, go to Xcode, choose your project, and then you'll find the bundle identifier under the identity heading. So copy that and paste that into the bundle ID field. And you can give the application a nickname, which is what's going to be shown in the Firebase user interface. Then let's click register app, and it will then next ask you to download a Google Services info plist file. So we'll download that. Once it's complete, you can go to Xcode, find your project folder, and then just drag and drop this file to the project folder, so the yellow folder under your project heading. It's going to ask you to copy the items if needed, so keep that checked, create the folder references, and make sure your target is selected in the add to targets. So now you've basically added the important configuration file, which has all the information about your Firebase project. The next thing you need to do is to actually add the Firebase dependency to your project. So this is what you need cocoapods for. So you need to go to your project folder. It's my test application here. And here you'll type pod in it to initialize a new cocoapods file. So we'll create a pod file in this directory, as you can see. And here under pods for my test application, you'll need to add this line. So pod Firebase Analytics. So let's add that one there. And then for good measure, let's add Google Tag Manager as well while we're at it. So this is how you would add Google Tag Manager to your application. So save the file and then type pod install. And now you can see that what dependencies it's installing. It installed Firebase Core, Firebase Analytics, Google Tag Manager, and so on. So these are all added by virtue of adding those dependencies to your installation. So at this point, you can actually run the app again, but the first thing you need to do is, since you added a pod file, you actually have to use the workspace this time. So shut down Xcode, make sure the emulator is shut down as well as it is. And this time, look for the XC workspace file, and then you can open that instead, like this. So the workspace is what you'll need to use now that you have pods added to the project. So the workspace includes both the pods and the application, so it builds the whole thing when you want to run the application. So now you're ready to, let's choose a better phone again, iPhone 6. So now let's hit play and see what happens. So the build was a success. It launches the emulator, and while we're waiting, we can click next. Next here. So now we need to add some initialization code to our iPhone application. Actually forgot that. So let's go to appdelegate.swift, and here you'll need to import Firebase. And then in the application function, which is fired after the application has launched, you run firebase app.configure. No options need to be passed. And now click run again to rerun the application. So build was a success, and now the application is running. It does the hello world thing. Down here you can find the logs, so you can actually search, grep it for Firebase. You can see that Firebase Analytics was started. You can even find a trace of Google Tag Manager, but it's just going to say that, hey, we didn't find a container found, but at least you know that Google Tag Manager dependency has been installed correctly. So now you can click next, and it will check if the app has communicated with our server. So if your computer is connected to the internet and you run the app in Xcode, it will actually be able to verify that the Firebase has been installed successfully. So then you can click continue to console. And at this point you can verify in the real-time reports that your application is collecting data. So you should see some information in real time. You should be able to see some default events, like first open, screen view, session start, and user engagement. So now we know that Firebase Analytics is working correctly. So the next thing we'll want to do is send a custom event to Firebase Analytics. So now it's time to go back to Xcode, and let's build our own custom event. So go open the view controller, because the view controller is what's loaded when the main view of the application is opened, and the main view currently contains the hello world text. So here we're going to need to import a new dependency. So it's Firebase Analytics module, not the Firebase Core, but Firebase Analytics. So we'll be using this module to send our events to Firebase Analytics. So then in the view.didLoad method, we can just add our call here, so it gets called as soon as the view controller has loaded the hello world view. So here you can use the analytics singleton and the log event call with that. And as you can see, it takes an event name as the parameter and then a key value pair list of parameters. So we'll be using a built-in, you could add something custom here if you wanted to, but instead we can use a built-in event name. And with Xcode it's kind of easy. You just start typing and eventually you'll find the enum for the event name. So this would return select_content in lowercase. This is just the kind of placeholder for the standard default event offered by Firebase. And then you need to add the parameters array. So we'll add a single parameter. Again, it could be a custom parameter if you wanted to, but we'll again use a predefined parameter called analytics parameter item ID. And the value will be my item ID, like this. So this is how you send events to Firebase Analytics. Analytics.log event, event name, and then a list of parameters. It's maybe slightly easier than with Android, because with Android you have to build the bundle first, but here you can basically just hard code everything into the call itself, and accessing these enums is maybe a bit more intuitive in Xcode. It really depends on how you approach programming. So now you're done. You can save it and then run the application to send the event to Firebase. And again, you can use the logs, even though they might be a bit messy, but you can use the logs to make sure that the event is being dispatched correctly. So once the application has started, you can, if you're masochistic. Oh, one thing we forgot to do. So in the product menu for Xcode, there's the scheme. So you need to click Edit Scheme, and then add a new argument passed on launch. So click the plus button, and it's -fire FIR analytics debug enable. This enables some verbose logging for Firebase Analytics. So let's keep that. And then you'll need to rerun the application. So this is actually what enables the events to appear in the log. So now we have a lot more analytics logging here. So for example, you might find, if you're lucky, you might find it instantly. So here we have our select content event sent with a custom parameter, or sent with the item ID parameter with the value my item ID. And now you can check the real time if it's already appeared here. So in the top events, you should find your select content event and then the item ID with the value my item ID. Under debug device, so this is way easier in iOS than on Android. You only had to add the flag to the launch arguments. So under debug device, you'll find your, well, if you can guess that that's your virtual device, you can click that and you'll find your events over here as well. So you can use this real-time view to get an actual look into what your debug devices are sending to Google Analytics. So kind of easy to use. So now we've configured Firebase Analytics and we've added our custom event. There's only one thing remaining, and that's how to add Google Tag Manager to Firebase. In Google Tag Manager, find an account under which you want to create the container, and click in admin, click the plus button to create a new container. So let's call this my test application. And let's set it for an iOS container. So create an iOS container. At this point you have a new container, so now we can create our first tag, and we'll be creating a simple event tag for Universal Analytics. So choose the tag type to be Google Analytics Universal Analytics, make it an event, let's call it a test event, where action is a new variable. So start typing the variable brackets, click new variable from the menu, and choose an event parameter. So we're creating a Firebase event parameter as a variable. And then from the suggested events list, choose item ID, because that's the one single variable we sent with the event. And then you can just name it however you like and save it after that. Then remember to add a tracking ID. So we'll add one here. And now if you want to create a mobile app view in Google Analytics, you actually need to create a new property. The property type is web. Let's call it my test application. This is a bit counterintuitive, I know, but it is what it is. So some domain here. Let's choose whatever. These are all inconsequential. Create the property, and then we've created the property, you will then need to create a new view. So creating a view in the property, and now a mobile app view. So my iOS application, like this. Oh, whatever, United States is fine. And then just copy the tracking ID and add it to your Google Tag Manager tag. Then we need to trigger this with an event, not the all events one, because that would create too many events. Instead, we'll create a new event which fires on the select content event name. So from the trigger type, choose a custom event where the event name variable equals select content, and then save it. Save the tag, and you should be good to go. So go ahead and publish the container. Here we go. Once the container is published, you'll be able to download the container JSON. So the JSON file is basically what governs the container. So it's not a binary file. You could edit it if you wish. Doesn't make a lot of sense to do that, but it's still a JSON file that's used to instruct the application. And this is a default container file which you'll add to the application. And it's a very good idea to always have the container file as up to date as possible in the application, because in cases where there's network lag or a fresh container is unable to be found over the network, the app will use the default container. So you want it to be as up to date as possible, just to account for those changes. So then when you're in your project root, you'll create a new folder here. So let's create a new folder called container. And then in container, you'll copy the container file you just downloaded into the container folder. So you will have the JSON file. And then in Xcode, you'll need to add files to my test application and look for the container folder. Make sure copy items if needed is checked, and create folder references is checked, and the targets are included as well. And that way the container will be in the root of the project where it belongs. So at this point you can actually launch the application again, and you can check some of the debug logs to see what happens. So let's do that. We managed to build it. So here we go, it's finished loading. It opens the application, runs a lot of debug stuff over there, shows the hello world, and then we can check what Google Tag Manager says. So here you can see that it's managed to load the container. It's processing an event gtm.load, which is an automatically sent event when the container has loaded, similar to GTM for web. And you can see that it's processing the select content event. So we can now also check to see if it's actually, if it's sending any data to googleanalytics.com. GA debugging has to actually be activated, but we can always check the real-time data in our new container to see if it's actually sending anything. So here you can see the event in real time. There's a category of test event and an action of my item ID. So you can see from here that it's actually logging those events correctly. So just to walk through what just happened, we have our view controller, which is firing an event into Firebase with the name select content and the parameter of my item ID. And when this event is fired, it's collected in Firebase just fine, but before it hits Firebase, it's processed by Google Tag Manager's container file, which has a trigger for this particular event. And when that event triggers the tag in Google Tag Manager, the tag grabs this item that we added as a variable in GTM and sends it to Google Analytics as well. So this is where Google Tag Manager really shines in mobile applications. It lets you use that Firebase event stream to send data to both GTM and to Firebase. So it's a really, really useful tool there as well, even though currently, the inventory of tags at your disposal isn't that impressive. But especially with custom templates, we're going to see more and more tags, and we're going to see the possibility to add those templates to these Firebase containers as well, just so that we can increase the number of stuff we have available in the Firebase container. So that brings us to an end. We've managed to build our beautiful iOS application. We've added Firebase to that application. We've loaded it in app delegate. We've initialized it with the Firebase app configure call. We added the Google service info, which has the information about our Firebase authentication stuff and everything that's needed. In the view controller, we're sending a single custom event to Firebase, or a single manually sent event. There are some automatic events automatically collected. And then we have our GTM container added to the application in the root in a folder called container. And the GTM container listens for the select content event, and when that happens, it actually sends an event to Google Analytics that you can then see in the real-time reports. So this is it. This is how we build a simple application in using Swift in Xcode to work on your iOS devices, and this is how you can start playing around with Firebase and testing it on your iOS devices or using the simulators offered by Xcode. Thank you for watching.